Hey everyone, Helen Blunden here at Activate Learn on Twitter. It is time for another book review. And you might be thinking, Helen, aren't you wearing the same top that you wore in the previous video? Well, you're a very good observer, aren't you? Yes, that's right. It's because I just shot another video. I thought I might do both video book reviews on the same day. Now it's funny, I mentioned in my previous video that I had a hard time trying to get back into reading the last few weeks simply because I had a really hefty book that I was reading that kind of didn't put me off reading, but I just needed to kind of get back into the swing of things. And I got back into the swing of things by reading That's What I Reckon. Now I'm not going to review this book because I've already done it. You could check it out in my previous video. However, what I did was I read this book, Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, called Maxims and Reflections. Now, it was funny that I was reading this book along with this book at the same time. Talk about chalk and cheese. One end of the spectrum, this one versus this on the other side, but somehow they link with the same kind of blokes, top blokes trying to make some meaning. So there you go. I put Goethe and Nat together. So what is Maxims and Reflection? Okay, so first of all, Goethe. Goethe was a writer. He was a polymath and he was born in 1749 in Germany. And a couple of years ago, I was actually quite lucky to be in Frankfurt, which was where he was born, to go and see Goethe House, a museum. And if you're ever in Germany, if you're ever in Frankfurt, I highly recommend this place. You go through, it's just school kids outside, you go through the house and you see the various rooms and his library and the kind of life that he grew up. And it was a positive, must have had a really good childhood because you get that feeling walking through the house. And you get the feeling of how interested he was in learning and in all sorts of topics that got him interested in knowledge, self-knowledge. And so this book is really a collection of all his reflections and maxims. And they were pulled together by a lady called Elizabeth Stopp, who also translated them and put them into some kind of books or themes and categories so they kind of make sense. Because you see, Goethe used to have these reflections and these ideas that he would then want to write them down quite quickly on anything that he had available, any paper, documents, books, whatever. He would scribble them all down, but they somehow didn't make sense. They didn't have a flow. They weren't themed or categorized. And so this book pulls them together in over 1,413 maxims and reflections that have been gathered around a range of his beliefs. Now, these beliefs and these themes all range from arts, natural sciences, physics, science. He was a polymath. He was interested in a lot of things. And to this day, he's considered as one of the best writers, even in Germany at the moment, as one of the best writers in the world. Obviously, he's passed away because he was born in 1749 and died in 1832. But I had never read any of his works at all. But I bought this one simply because when I looked at it, it reminded me of the works of Stoics. So kind of like short paragraphs, short reflections. I loved how they were themed. Now you might be thinking, well, what are some of the things that he talks about? Well, on page 57, he talks about the journeyman years. So these were reflections from Wilhelm Meister's journeyman years written in 1829. And they were thoughts about art, ethics, nature, and the spirit of travellers. And in Maxim 441, he says, there's nothing clever that hasn't been thought of before. You've just got to try and think it all over again. That's so true, isn't it? And another one, it follows 442. How can we learn self-knowledge? Never by taking thought, but rather by taking action. Try to do your duty and you'll soon discover what you're like. I loved it. And then it continues, but what is your duty? the demands of the day. So as you can see, these maxims have been put into some kind of order, and I could imagine that they could have been written on scraps of paper here and there, in journals here and there, and pulling them all together to kind of make some semblance of order and how they fit in must have been quite a job. So I had gone through this book, and as you can see, I have made little dog ears and little notes as well, because what I want to do is I want to pull those quotes together and put them into a blog post, because I really want to use these quotes in some way. It continues on page 103 about art and learning, and this is something that I'm interested in, about how we're using arts and crafts to be able to learn, be used for personal growth. So in 756 he says, art and learning are words so often used and whose precise difference is so rarely understood. The one is often used for the other. And then he continues, I think one could describe learning as knowledge of things in general, extracted knowledge. Art, on the other hand, would be learning used for action. Learning would be reason, and art its mechanism. In the end, learning would be the theorem, and art the problem. So as I was reading these, I would think to myself, you'd have to stop and really sit and think about what he meant. Now, some of the quotes in here, I'm not saying they're all genius quotes and they're all fantastic and in-depth, but these are, I guess, ideas, bum plucks, reflections, and some of them are really good. Some of them you go, that's dated a bit. No, maybe not. I don't agree with that. But on the whole, really good read. I would strongly recommend it if you are interested in starting with some writing by Goethe. I'm glad I read this book, and it also gives you an idea of how things really haven't changed and how we all search for meaning in our life, and same to the people who used to live in the 1700s and earlier. In fact, searching for meaning is not new. So luckily for Goethe, he's put it down on paper. We've got it all in the one book here. I can refer to this whenever I want now, and it gives you some food for thought. Right, so that is it. Goethe, Maxims and Reflections. Let me know what you think if you've read this book. Have you read any of his other books? What would you suggest I read if I wanted to go on with reading some of his works? Okay then, thanks again, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.